Yes, sir. Sir is waiting.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He is coming, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, very good morning. Sorry I kept you waiting for a few minutes. With your permission, it's a great privilege to welcome you, and I'll request Professor Poonamji to give the welcome remarks.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. I have great pleasure and honor to welcome you all for this good governance webinar subjected Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, institution building and meeting the capacity building needs of IAS officers. First of all, I welcome the eminent lead speaker, Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, Director Labasna, Chairperson of this webinar, Shri V. Srinivas, Additional Secretary, Department of Administrative Reforms and Public Grievances and Director General, National Center for Good Governance, Government of India, all eminent scholars from reputed universities and institutions, the lead speakers of webinar on good governance series organized by NCGG, the senior officials of DRPG, Government of India, the senior officials of Labasna, all district collectors, the faculty from Indian Institute of Management and ATIs of India, the officers, trainees, Labasna, my colleague from NCGG and team. You might be aware that the National Center for Good Governance has been set up by the Government of India as an apex think tank to work on good governance issues. As it is our mandate to share the best practices, interventions in good governance issues, today we will listen to Director Labasna. During the discussions, we shall be benefited a lot that how to build the prime institution which is known at international level too, especially for the senior civil servants of Labasna. So first of all, I welcome our Director General Sri V. Srinivas to give the introductory speech about this eminent session. Thank you, sir. Please welcome.
Thank you, Professor Poonam. Respected Director LBS-NAA, Shri Sanjeev Chopra ji. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome the Director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Shri Sanjeev Chopra ji, to the National Center for Good Governance webinar series, discussion 8 on LBS-NAA institution building and meeting the capacity building needs of IAS officers. Shri Sanjeev Chopra ji brings vast administrative experience to the post of Director LBS-NAA, having served as Deputy Director Senior at the Academy. He is an eminent author, a captivating orator, and a distinguished academician. I personally heard him in a number of webinars, and I was captivated by the forcefulness and the sheer conviction with which arguments are presented. Over the past 2 years of serving with him, I have witnessed the massive institution building efforts that he has undertaken at LBS-NAA and the total transformation of the capacity building programs of IAS officers marked by the common foundation course at the Statue of Unity at Kevadia on October 31 for the last 2 years. Further, as a frequent visitor to the Academy, I have always noticed his popularity amongst young IAS probationers as a director who has been kind and compassionate to the needs of young civil servants, keenly associated with their development into competent officials. The influence LBS-NAA has in transforming young individuals selected into the IAS into competent, disciplined officials representing the best values of the steel frame of Indian administration is considerable. It is the professionalism, the structure of the courses, the exposure visits, the assignments that contribute to the transformation of young minds to nation building and a career in civil service. It is the LBS-NAA that teaches IAS officers the foundational and non-negotiable values of commitment to the larger public good against all odds. Yoga karmastu kaushalam. Achievement is efficiency in action. The LBS-NAA also teaches young officials leadership skills for neutral and unbiased decision making. Let me quote Professor Rumki Basu, who is a frequent participant in our webinars. She has said that the environment in which a future Indian civil servant will work will be characterized by the features of a globally competitive economy, global services, information technology, artificial intelligence. In such a milieu, he will be expected to be a professional, a result-oriented and cost-effective bureaucrat with a great sense of timing and accountability. He will continue to perform routine law and order functions, dispense justice, and work with public interest. He will be executing developmental programs in the collaboration of private and voluntary sectors. He will also continue to advise and aid the central and state governments to deliver and run effective public service delivery systems. A civil servant in the new dispensation of developmental governance is expected to play the role of a facilitator, a coordinator, advisor, and motivator, and not merely an executor of developmental programs. In a nation of continental size, to implement programs of the magnitude of NREGA, Right to Education, Right to Information, Forest Rights Act, Food Security Act, Midday Meal Scheme represents the largest management exercises in the world. It is to Sri Sanjeev Chopraji's credit that he trains officials to foster excellence in service delivery, e-governance, process reforms, dealing with administrative challenges at the cutting edge level. With these opening remarks, I greatly look forward to listening to Sri Sanjeev Chopraji today. I thank him for accepting the invitation of the NCGG to participate in this webinar. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So now we'd like to give a brief introduction about our eminent and lead speaker, about the Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. Dr. Sanjeev Chopra had joined Indian Administrative Service in the year 1985, West Bengal cadre. He holds a PhD in management besides degree in law, history and literature. Currently, he is the director of Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy for Administration, Mussoorie, Uttarakhand. He is the recipient of the Robert S. McNamara Fellowship of the World Bank and the Hubert H. Humphrey Fellowship at the University of Cornell. He was also a guest scholar at the Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C., and attended the 21st Century Trust Fellows program at Metron College, Oxford. He has written extensively on policy issues in governance and development, interventions in rural development, agriculture, marketing reforms, cooperatives, and farmer organizations. He has been invited to deliver lectures at talks at IIMs, ASCI, FRI, JGF, NFA, and as symposia and the conferences across the country. He has also delivered keynotes as International Cooperative Alliance conferences at Beijing, Abu Dhabi, and Ho Chi Minh City. He has several books to his credit, including At the Crossroads, Development Discourses in India, Agri Matters, 10,000 Crores, besides 3 edited volumes on policy colloquia on cooperatives in the SAARC region, and articles in leading papers like EPW, Mainstream, Frontier, Encounter, and Millennium Post. He curates a literature and arts festival, Valley of Words, at Dehradun in November every year. He has served as the District Magistrate of Murshidabad, CEO of Himul and Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Authority, ADM of Kuch Behar, and STOL Ghatal, West Midnapur District, and Kalimpong in Darjeeling, where he was also posted as Assistant Magistrate for Training. From 2002 to 2007, he served the government of Uttarakhand as the Secretary to the Industrial Development and Information Technology Departments. From 2007 to 2010, he was Principal Secretary to the government of West Bengal in the Agriculture, Food Processing and Horticulture departments. From 2010 to 2015, he was the Mission Director for the National Horticulture Mission and National Mission on Micro Irrigation and Managing Director of the National Agriculture Cooperative Marketing Federation of India Limited and National Horticulture Board. Besides looking after international cooperation in the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, before joining the Academy on January 1, 2019, he was the Additional Chief Secretary to the Government of West Bengal in the Department of Industry, Commerce and Enterprises, as well as the Director General of the Administrative Training Institute, Kolkata. Welcome, sir. Now we are very eager to listen you. Thank you.
Thank you, Poonam, for such a long introduction. I mean, and thank you very much, Srini, for inviting me. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be part of the NCGG governance webinar series. So what I'll do is, as has been directed by you, I've prepared a short presentation, and if the slide share facility is allowed, I'll just run the presentation with a few opening remarks. You know, first of all, I think as Dr. Srinivas said, you know, the competencies of civil servants must change every decade. You know, if not even earlier than a decade, because the fact is that the civil services of India and indeed elsewhere must be able to, you know, regenerate themselves. Otherwise, we will not be able to, we will become irrelevant if we do not march with the times. And in fact, that reminds me of a very interesting book by David Potter, who wrote about India's political administrators way back in 1984. And he predicted that the IAS and the entire civil services are going to go down, because he felt that in the 80s, you know, the primary task of what he perceived the task of the ICS or the IAS officers was to maintain law and order, criminal justice administration. And he felt that because that has moved out to the judiciary, the IAS officers will not have much to do. But the last 3 or 4 decades have seen many new responsibilities, many new challenges for the IAS. But let me stick to our topic today, which is the LBSNA institutional building and meeting the capacity building needs of IAS officers. Now, Let me start by an opening proposition, which is that, however bright individuals might be, it is institutions which define system, institutions which ensure that there is maintenance of continuity with change, because, as we look at timelines, individuals have a finite lifetime, whereas institutions go on and on and on. I mean, we have, all individuals can hope to live for a particular time period, say 7, 8, 9 decades, but institutions are made forever. Like this academy, for instance, has seen so many directors. We've seen so many faculty members. We've seen change in emphasis, but an institution goes on forever, and therefore the strength of an institution is far more important than the individuals who occupy various positions at various points of time. And that's true not just for the LBSNAA, it's true for the Indian Army, it's true for the Indian judiciary, it is true for large business organizations. In fact, the best organizations are those where individuals play less of a personal role and the institutional mechanism takes over. And the history of the world is also a remarkable testimony to the fact that wherever nations, institutions are more than the individuals, that is where institutional role becomes very important. The second aspect here is capacity. Individuals, by their very nature, we have a limited capacity, whereas institutions theoretically have an unlimited capacity and can do so many things because, for instance, Srinivas himself specializes on economic matters. He's written on IMF, written on several things. I too work on some other aspects, but our abilities as individuals, we can only look at 2, 3, 4 areas, but the organizations we represent can look at many, many, many areas. Again, as I said, individuals can have competencies which will be in single digit, whereas the competencies of an institution are double digit and more, and the academy certainly has, and even the NCGG we have together, and institutions collaborate. And when institutions like LBSNA and NCGG collaborate, we offer the best programs to whether it is Maldives or it is Bangladesh or Myanmar, and that's how we stretch our thing forward. Again, I wanted to focus on the flexibility index. Institutions, successful institutions, have a built-in flexibility, a much greater flexibility, and therefore institutions can also afford both the factual and the counterfactual. So in an argument or in a discussion, some faculty can take a position which is pro, another set of faculty can take a position which is the con side of it, and together an institution can deliver both the factual and the counterfactual and are far more flexible than individuals ever are. And last but not the least, great institutions like ours, we celebrate diversity and are always more than the sum of the parts. It is actually a case of 1 making 11. That is what institutions do. And let me now talk to you about, move on, what the core values of the academy are, some of which have been already mentioned by my distinguished colleague, Dr. Srinivas. The first of this is integrity. I'll not spend much time on this because this is a slide which is on a slide share mode and you can go through it. But remember, essentially, that we are very clear, and the point about political neutrality, which Dr. Srinivas already made, that's a core value for us. If we are not consistent, if we do not have courage of conviction, then it does not matter how bright we are, because there are exceptionally bright people in the world. But it does not matter. What matters is whether a bright person is also attached to some core values. That is the defining element. The second aspect is respect, where we talk about embracing diversity of caste, color, religion, gender, age, language. And as it is being said, we have to grow, but our growth is not arrogance, right? So this is a very important core value which we have. Next. We're talking about being professionals. And one of the aspects of being professional is that we respect other professionals. A good professional is one who's confident and competent, but also believes in the competence of the other professionals. And therefore, we seek to collaborate. So we are doing a program. We love to collaborate with IRMA. We love to collaborate with NCGG, the Indian Statistical Institute, the Boston Pledge, the Harvard Business School, the Harvard School of Public Policy. So a great institution also believes in collaboration because every institution can give something to the other. So that's a very important aspect. And last but not the least, if we are not the voice of the underprivileged, and if we are not proactive in addressing injustice against them, then there is no logic and there is no rationale for their existence. In fact, this is what distinguishes us from a typical business program at the IIM or at the Wharton School. Whereas they are looking at profits, we are looking at people. They're looking at value in narrow terms of GDP. We are looking at a much greater definition of value. We look at ecology, we look at environment, we look at livelihoods, and therefore that is what brings a greater degree of professionalism. That is what the LBS National Academy stands for. This is the core part of the institute. Next. And how this is being strengthened is because we have knowledge centers at Labasna, at the academy, which again help us to look into domains which are not core or not, I mean, when you use the word core, the core element is the core teaching which goes into the professional phases of an officer's career, which are general to everybody. But over and above that, we have the Center for Public Systems Management, where we are looking at the urban affairs, we look at the cooperatives and rural development. And when we look at urban affairs, for instance, that is where we need to collaborate with the Institute of Human Settlements. We need to talk to the All India Institute of Local Self-Government. We talk to the Ministry of Urban Development. In CCRD, which is the Center for Cooperatives and Rural Development, we look at NAFED, we look at IRMA, we look at FCI, we look at all procurement agencies. And that's something, again, I wanted to share with the participants here, that the CVC has mandated us, has asked us to look at why is it that procurement operations under FCI and NAFED do not have the same credibility which procurement operations under NDDB have. Now, is it an institutional element? Because the same set of people who work for FCI and who work for NAFED and who work with NDDB, when they find that the system is perfect or the system is near perfect, the performance is much better. So we're trying to look at these aspects. Then, of course, we have the National Gender and Child Rights Center, which is looking at intersectionality, which is looking at so many other things. Now, these centers work independently, and yet what they get is featured into the core teaching and the thing. Then we have the Center for Disaster Management. We have the Center for Rural Studies, which we are very honored is now named after our ex-director, B.N. Ugandhar. And Dr. Srinivas had flown in specially to pay his tributes for this. And we have the Center for Food, Health and Safety, which we run in collaboration with the FSSAI, the Food Standards Safety Authority of India. Now, this is what we do. I mean, the Academy, of course, as everybody knows, runs the professional phase 1, phase 2, the foundation course, the mid-career training program. And from this year onwards, other services will also be joining the mid-career training program, which will take our mind to the overall governance framework of this country. So what I'm saying is that unless you have great institutions, we will not be able to deliver the mandate which the government expects us to do. And great institutions is not the individual coming together of individuals. It is individuals coming together to work on the core philosophy or the core mandate which the academy owns for itself or which the academy inheres for itself. Now let's move on, and I'll talk to you about. And the second part of the subject that we had is capacity building. Now, capacity building of IAS officers, basically an IAS officer is a decision maker. You know, capacity building of an IAS officer basically, just go back, is decision making. Decision making is the core value of an IAS officer. If an IAS officer cannot make decisions, then he is no good, because as Dr. Srinivas has said, it is yoga karmasu kaushalam. That is, it is only when you have performed an action can you be measured on that. I mean, I keep on giving this argument many times that after all, the Shanti Parv of Bhisham Pitama is only a lecture. The Shanti Parv of Bhisham Pitama, where he is saying that this should be done and this should be done and this should be done. If all that had been done, then there would have been no Mahabharata. So the whole issue is not about what is being said. The issue is about what is being done. And that is where the challenge for the civil servant comes. And therefore, for decision making, these are the 4 core elements which I think are very, very important. And in the next few slides, I'll go on and elaborate that. First of all, decision making has to be based on empirical facts. We must know what the fact is on the ground. That is why we are ground officers. We are field level officers. We need to know everything about the global sphere, but you need to touch the ground. That is the first thing. Knowing things on the ground and applying the knowledge of law to that. So you must know what is happening on the ground, how is it connected to the law? And then you have to understand the context when a decision has to be taken. I mean, even if an encroachment has to be removed, you don't do it in the month of December when it is snowing all around. You have to wait. You know, these are all applications which we have to look at. So understand the context. When do we do a particular thing? And we must understand what are the consequences, short, medium, and long term, not for individuals, but for, I mean, I'm not saying that for a moment that don't remove encroachment because you'll be transferred the next day. No, that is not the point that is being made. The point that is being made is that are we looking at alternate spaces? What is the context? What is the long-term implication of what you're doing? What is the short-term implication of what you're doing? All this is what makes a good civil servant. Next. Now, you see, what I wanted to share with you was that, no, in between you have forgotten there's one slide in between, capacity building for IAS officers, decision making. I think there's a change in sequence. This is where it comes in. Okay. So, it's so important for all of us in the IAS and even in other services to understand the ecosystem in which we operate. The ecosystem in which we operate is more than the sum of all the rules and regulations and guidelines that you have. You have to understand who mans the system. I mean, what is the, to give you an example, the same set of laws, say the land reform legislation, is looked at differently in different states at different points of time, depending on what is the strength of the ruling party at that point of time. That is so very important, because if you do not understand the ecosystem in which you operate and you just go around trying to do things, this is exactly part of our capacity building assessment. How do you understand what the ecosystem is, and how do you define one's role in it? The amount of things which a district collector can do is so much that he can spend his entire time doing so many things, and yet he will have to prioritize. He and she will have to prioritize. I mean, in the sense that everything is part of the mandate of the Director Academy. I mean, I could be looking all the time at Center for Disaster Management. I could be looking at one of the micro things, but one must know that essentially the core job of this training academy is to train the youngest batches. So if there is if I have to spend my time or divide my time between an officer in phase 1 and an officer on phase 5, I would certainly want to spend more time with an officer of phase 1, because that is where he or she has to put in many more years into the country, many more years into the system. Next very important thing is that we need to redefine our role. We need to define our role. Part of your role is given, and part of your role has to be redefined. So one of the essential things about an IAS officer or being an IAS officer is that while he will certainly follow the rules, he will also understand what is beyond the rule, what is the circumstances, what are the surrounding circumstances about the rule. So you redefine your role in the current dynamic. For example, it's a very, whether it is a question of looking at empowerment of women, whether it's a camp that you hold for legal literacy and for financial literacy, try to understand what is it that can be done. So whether it is the JAM Trinity, and last but not the least, the decision-making capacity of officers, individuals, and institutions that has to develop. So unless the capacity of a police station improve, if you do not improve the capacity of a block development officer, then all the funds that you get from MGNREGA or for NRLM, I mean, how do you do that? So that is only done when the capacity building improves, not just for officers, but also for the institutions which they represent. So these are this is an important aspect which we have to look at, and I will now illustrate this with this example that I have, Lakshadweep and Murshidabad. I use this example because I was recently in Lakshadweep, which has a population of about 76,000 people, and Murshidabad, which is a population of 76 lakh people. And I was collector in Murshidabad, and when we were there in Lakshadweep this time, we found that there's a helicopter service to sort of retrieve patients from any island at zero cost to the islander, and the person is shifted to the Cochin hospital. And there's a insurance policy and the helicopter service is given free to whoever falls sick in Lakshadweep. Now, it's a great privilege, great thing, but can it be replicated in Murshidabad? The answer is no, because if there are only 76,000 people, you can expect 5 to 10 emergencies in a day maximum. But in fact, empirically, they do not get emergencies once in 2 days or 3 days also. So if you're going to get 70, if there are only 76,000 people, then you can afford and actually must do helicopter evacuation, because there's no way in which they can be evacuated by ship and taken to Cochin. But this example cannot be replicated in Murshidabad because you have 76 lakh people and you cannot obviously have 100 helicopters. And also because Murshidabad is a flat land and you can make the connection and get people from the remotest part of Murshidabad to the district hospital in the same 4 to 5 hours that you can get a person from Lakshadweep to Cochin. So it's not a question of the helicopter service. It's a question of being able to get people from their place where they are not well to a referral facility, which is within 4 to 5 hours of time, which is what is humanly possible. And so if you save lives, you save lives. But even while saving lives, you have to look at examples which are doable rather than look at an ideal condition. Because remember that in the civil services, you're not looking at the ideal, you're looking at the ground reality today, and you're also looking at what can be done further. Likewise, with the hills and the plains, there are policies which are absolutely wonderful and make a lot of sense for the hills. There are policies which make a lot of sense for the plain areas, but you have to look at demography and you have to look at geography before you can take decisions. Now, this is all part of the capacity building process that we are talking about. You must know what rule is relevant, what is the context, what was the context, because if you were to do just a mechanical application of rules, then you are not a civil servant. The difference between a civil servant and a person who's just at the field level worker is that you are also in a position to understand the context in which a particular law or a particular rule was made and how you're going to implement it. And you also have the ability to ask for a change in that particular legislation or the rules of that legislation. And I'm always very fond of giving this example from Darjeeling Hills, where if we were to procure milk from the cows of who inhabit Darjeeling, then you will actually need to add whole milk powder to meet the requirements of the Food Safety Standards Authority of India these days, and in those days PFA. And therefore we were able to, way back in 1992, with just about 6 to 7 years of service, one was able to tweak the PFA insofar as its application in Darjeeling district is concerned by pointing out that, look, this is not a practical step. We need to understand that the logic of the PFA was to prevent adulteration in milk. It was not to make milk, not to add fat to milk to make it, yield a particular standard. So standards are set for a particular objective. If that objective can be met by changing those standards or by tweaking those standards to special circumstances, then it ought to be done. So in the final analysis, because I think we also need to give time for questions and answers, administration and capacity building is all about what is not just about what can be done, but about what must be done, and more importantly, what must never be done. So there are no strict rule books to this, but a proper understanding and understanding of the context will help us all to enhance our decision-making abilities. And we do need strong institutions like Labasna, institution at the level of a BDO, institution at the level of a police station, institution at the level of a school. All these institutions need to be strong, and the civil servants have an important role in enhancing their capacity as well as in the capacity of institutions which they represent. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a candid discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a privilege to listen to the director of LBS-NA always, and more so listening to you. One felt that I was listening to the head of leading one of the greatest training institutions in the world. Let me start with a personal question. You've been there in 3 capacities. You were a probationer, you've been deputy director, and now as the director, how do you find the changes that the academy itself has undergone? Every time I come there, I feel tremendous thrill in walking up the stairs to your office. How do you find the changes the academy has undergone in your career of 35 years plus?
No, I think that the academy has really transformed itself, and it is obviously for the better because if you look at it in three ways, one is the people that you have in the academy on the teaching faculty side and on the directing staff. I think one major positive change that has happened is that today everybody is in the academy by choice. You do not have anybody from the assistant director to the director who's not here by choice. So I think that makes a lot of difference. 35 years ago, many people were here by choice, but many people were also thrust upon the academy. And I think that reflected because some of our faculty members were not happy being here. And I think that was not a good thing. I mean, everybody who's here should be happy and comfortable and wanting to be here. And so therefore we attract people who have an academic disposition. We attract people who obviously have a sense of moral value, who are very clear about what the academy stands for, and therefore when they come here, they add to the academy. So that's one thing. Everybody being here by choice, that is one. Number two, I must say very candidly that the social consciousness of the officer trainees today is much better than it was in my times. We just joined the civil services because there's nothing else available. Now today people are leaving Cisco and they're leaving TCS and they're leaving jobs because today it is a profession by choice. In our times, whoever was bright was doing well. Everybody said sit for the exam, and so people sat for the exam. Today, it's also more difficult, it's more competitive, and there are other professions available. So, if you want to make money, you have a startup, you do many things. You are a successful lawyer, you make as much as an IAS officer would do. So the reasons why people are joining the IAS are different. And therefore, the quality of interaction has become very nice. And I would say that the interaction is also very bold and very confident. The third factor which has made a lot of difference is the composition. In our times, girls were less than 10%. Today, we have 35% girls and about 50% women are on the faculty of the academy. So that's changed the very dynamic of the academy in terms of the interpersonal communication, in terms of the overall ecosystem. Thanks to Mr. Yugandhar, the infrastructure is the best. You cannot think of infrastructure like this. We did not have running water and all these things, and power cuts. And so, in terms of creature comforts, again, the academy has become much better than it was in our time. And third, most important thing is that the academy today offers more than the core. The core being the training that we talked about, but more than the core. So, which means that if my colleagues are interested in urban affairs or in gender center or in CDM, or if they think of any other center as well, it is very much possible for us to accommodate the intellectual and the academic needs, not only of the faculty members, but also the young officer training. And the fourth thing, which is now, which for the last 2 or 3 years, and I've coined a term for it, it's called conscious incrementalism. So I believe that conscious incrementalism, and I'm going to take the IPR for that, Srini, before somebody else picks it up. You have to continuously and incrementally improve the thing. For instance, co-learning is one thing which we've decided and which we've implemented for the last 2 years. So why should people who've done their MA in economics be taught economics here, right? So the entire Indian Economic Service officers were used to mentor or to act as coaches for those who have not studied economics. With 70% engineers, they don't need a class on ICT, right? But they can be used, and we are using them now to coach and mentor those who come from a background of law and from history and literature. And those who have a background in law, for example, should not be asked to attend a class on law. Who can teach law to an LLM graduate or an LLB from one of the national law schools? So we were actually, wasting a lot of our time in teaching very, very routine, very, very rudimentary stuff to everybody. So that whole notion of one size fits all has changed. And that's, I think, what has brought in a lot of dynamic here. So, and one more thing, Srini, is that, you know, in our generation, maybe not yours, you're again, you know, younger to me by a decade. So, you know, we felt that, I mean, the director must know all. No, the director cannot know all. I mean, how will the director know more about CDM or about NRLM? Because I've worked in certain sectors. I mean, I've not worked in urban, and none of us will get to work in all the sectors, right? So these are all the changes which I feel it's a more open academy. It's a far more welcoming academy. It's a far more diverse academy. And I'm very happy to say that, I mean, on several issues which in fact, officers have come out and even exposed, mentioned their sexual orientation, their gender orientation, which I thought in our times was, I mean, nobody would have talked about it, nobody would have discussed it, but we are becoming more open.
Thank you. Let me turn to the next issue. You did mention that individuals and institutions. I, for one, have always believed institutions can only be strong when individuals are strong, and institutions rise and fall with individuals. How do you see, the one thing that I noticed was I went as an MTech in chemical engineering with a great degree of specialization to the LBS, and then transformed myself into a generalist. Today, in this age of specialists, how do you see generalist administrators faring? The transformation of specialists into generalists is what happens at the academy. And how do you see the generalists that the academy is producing to come into this country's administrative setups faring in an age of specialists? And organizations are becoming increasingly specialized with a greater amount of data handling, regulatory functions coming in. How do you see that role of generalist in a specialist era?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very, very pertinent question, and something which all members of the civil services would be interested in getting a clear and a straight answer. Let me put it in two ways. The first is that, you know, rather than use the word generalist, we could also say that we are specialists of the context, because there is nobody except us who understands the domain and the context, you know. So we may not be specialists of a particular thing, but we are specialists of the context. And that is the professional thing in itself. Why are we saying that we are journalists? We are professional administrators. We are professionals of governance. And when you are a governance professional, which means that you can govern any institution, whether that institution is a sky, or whether that institution is a library, or whether that institution is a museum, or whether that institution is anything, you require some core professional governance aspects. For example, does anybody say to a chartered accountant that how can you do accounts of the AIIMS and also of the Scots Hospital and also of the Wizcraft and also of a circus company and also of an individual? I mean, has anybody asked this question to a CA? Has anybody asked this question to an architect, that how can you design a school building and how can you design a hospital building? I think the very way in which this question is posed is wrong. This is a wrong posing of a question. The fundamental question is there a governance professional? Are governance professionals required? If the answer is yes, then we are governance professionals. And let us also understand that more and more people, more and more institutions are looking up to us. I mean, you've seen academics making a mess of universities, you know, by being registrars there and by being VCs there. Registrar is a purely administrative job. It's a purely administrative job. I think a mid-ranking state civil service officer would do a much better job as a registrar than many registrars that we have. So let's frame the question differently. Are governance professionals required in institutions as wide-ranging as the Institute of Advanced Studies at Shimla and the PGI at Chandigarh and the AIIMS in Delhi? Do they not require an administrator? They require an administrator. Don't we have posts there? Then aren't they going to be doing it? So who's going to run it? Who's going to run the PGI? Who's going to run the AIIMS? Who's going to run all these institutions? We have to do it. And let us say it with pride that we are governance professionals. That is one. Number two, and I quite get the thing that, you know, we also need to be specialists of a particular domain within the larger sector of things. So starting from phase 3 this year, you'll be glad to know that the format that we are doing is that when the phase 2 is going to be coming to us on the 22nd of February, we're getting about 75 to 80 people. So we will be dividing them into, or asking their options to look at 4 broad thematic areas: agriculture, rural development, and the sectors associated with that. Looking at infrastructure and power as another area which will call for investments and IRR and all these things. Looking at the social sector, health, education, all these things, and looking at the security scenario of the country, that is defense and home affairs, internal security, Naxalism, and the cyber terrorism and all these things. And what we are planning to do this year, Srini, is that we are planning to do one session in the morning, which is general. And the rest of the time, these groups are going to be talking to institutions and individuals which are connected with these sectors. For example, in the case of agriculture, it will be the IRMA, it will be the MANAGE, it will be the ICRIER, it will be the IFPRI, it will be the FAO. So these people then get into the deep details of the farm laws, why this is happening, what is the background, what is the land legislation, what is leasing, and so they are interested in this. So let them fall into this and those who are interested in infrastructure and power and in finance and refinance, and so we get the heads of the REC and PFC and people like you to talk to them. We get people who are in the health sector and the education sector, Bharti Ahuja, other people. We get them to talk to them about health and social inclusion and various other things. And then we talk to people who are, we talk to the Army General, then we talk to Ajay Kumar, and we talk to those who spend a long time in the Defense Ministry and the Home Ministry, Vivek Bhardwaj, So we choose our people according to the stream that our officers are interested in, and therefore it'll create a different feel altogether. So you have, in the first place, governance as professionals, and then second place, you have domain specialization, which we evolve in this manner. So that's what the academy will be doing to address both the issues that you have asked.
Thank you, sir. Let me flag the third issue. One thing that the academy always instills in young officers is service to the underprivileged, and that is what you had mentioned in your presentation also. Can you please highlight the role of the Center for Rural Studies? In fact, I have very fond memories of my village visit and doing the land reforms assignments thereafter. The Center for Rural Studies today represents one of the great repositories of land reforms, legislations, and practices across India. In fact, I have not come across any such repository anywhere in the country. And how do you see the role of the Center for Rural Studies? How do you wish to take it forward? Because it's an integral element of instilling the sense of serving the underprivileged and also decision making through legal as well as standing up for the poorest of the poor in the country.
The CRS is responsible, as you're aware, for the district training component and the village visit attachment of the officers. This year, I'm glad that we did it. I'm also, I also feel that, we should have done it many years earlier. This year we asked all our officer trainees to visit one brick kiln in their district, at least one brick kiln in their district. And the visit to the brick kiln has shown our officers what is the condition in these brick kilns. The most modern buildings that we live in, the foundation stone for these buildings is made in 17th, 18th century technology structures where the worst form of human exploitation is taking place. Based on our studies, we are coming out with a volume called Breaking the Mold, which will be released sometimes next month, which documents the stories of brick kilns in the country, and now 180 of the 180 officers, at least 150 officers have been able to understand that there is a law which governs brick kilns. This was beyond our radar. We never thought about it. We never even thought about it. And this actually happened because I read a news item in a newspaper, which really shocked me, I don't want to talk about that because it really is, and I'm sure all of us who are listening here understand that that was one aspect which really shook all of us here in the academy. And we decided that, we keep on doing this land titling and this. Look, thanks to NREGA and thanks to the right to food, absolute poverty absolute poverty is not directly visible in most districts, in many districts of the country. But every district in the country has a brick kiln. And in every district of the country, in most of the brick kilns, we're still having some of the worst kind of human rights abuses, sexual violations, violations on women who are working there, on young children who are working there. So we've documented all this. And now we've prepared a little manual on what can a district magistrate do, what can an SDM do when he or she comes across a brick kiln. What does he or she do? We've tried to link it up. We've actually asked the BIS, the Bureau of Indian Standards, that if you can make standards for hospitals, if you can make standards for schools, if you can make standards for hotels and restaurants, why don't you make standards for brick kilns? Why don't you make standards of brick? 20 million workers are employed in brick kilns in this country. So our work here, which is being steered by the Center for Rural Studies, is going to play a very significant role in transforming the economies of the brick kilns, because not only are brick kilns bad in terms of what it does to the human beings, what it does in terms of to the topsoil, what it does to the environment. So they're flouting all possible laws. And yet it was something which somehow or the other did not occur to us. You know, you've been a probationer here, I've been a probationer here, I've been a deputy director here. It didn't just, because the fact is that there are actually so many things that we have to be concerned with that sometimes these things don't get highlighted. So fortunately, this has come out. And I'll also urge the DARPG that once this book comes out, please circulate it across the country. We're trying to get a Hindi edition also made. We're working with HarperCollins on this, expected next month. And I think, personally feel, you know, that this is one challenge. Now, next year, we're looking at nutrition amongst women. Every year, I think, you know, we need to look at new subjects, because what was happening was, you know, that to some extent, it was becoming a bit repetitive. You know, you go on to the same land reform, land movement, you know, thing. So people were, I mean, for all the best efforts, it was becoming a bit routinized. So I've thought, and the center actually thought, that let's pick up one particular aspect which is being neglected and highlight that and give a proper, so it's no point crying that, all right, this is bad. We as administrators must say that, all right, this is what it was, this is what it should be, and here is your manual, here is your law, this is what, this is how you can proceed. So that's what we are, that's what the BNY CRS did this year.
I think it's a wonderful study that will come out. We'll be happy to take it up and circulate it across all the fora that are available to us once this document comes out. There's one area that I'd like to draw your attention to. That is, a young IAS officer goes to the field into a totally new setup. Cadres are assigned, and there is tremendous amount of pressure groups, and interpersonal skills, negotiation skills become very important. Can you please shed some light on the inputs and the capacity building with regard to enhancing interpersonal relations, as also negotiation skills of a civil servant?
See, one of the things, you know, that we go to reckon with now is that, unlike your time and my time, when we were not choosing our cadres, officers are now choosing their cadres, and about 90% of them are in either their state or in the next state, right? Or in a state of their choice because of the spouses. I mean, there's a girl, for example, whose husband is in the RBI, so she's consciously chosen Maharashtra cadre, right? Because rightly she felt that, you know, most of the time the husband would be in that place in Bombay. So 90% of the officers today are actually in cadres which they are very comfortable with. So there is a big difference between your time and my time. When you're going to Rajasthan and my going to West Bengal was a far greater adjustment than if you had been in, Telangana or Andhra or one of the neighboring states. So that is this has its pros and it has its cons. But certainly in terms of the first few years, it is a pro. It's a pro because, in fact, language teaching in the academy has become a bit of a problem, because there's nobody who's getting into Punjab who needs to know Punjabi, right? So, I mean, he's either from Punjab or he's from Haryana or he's from Delhi, so he knows what it is all about. So, so it's a different set of challenges, you know. Now it comes to the second thing, you know, about interpersonal relations and about non-adversarial communication. I think these are areas on which I've given a lot of emphasis. This co-learning project which the officers are doing has actually imparted them. You know, today, less than 50% of the academic inputs are delivered by us. The remaining academic inputs are delivered by them, of course, with a lot of mentoring. You know, it is not that we are just abdicating our responsibility and you deliver the content. No, it is understanding how that content. So it's made a lot of difference. So in fact, everybody who has joined this phase one would have spent at least 15 to 20 minutes communicating his or her viewpoint to a group, to a peer group. And that's made a lot of difference. I mean, the opportunities which they have for speaking, for elocution, for reciting, for all these things, these have actually, been very, very powerful. These are very great projects. I mean, in fact, on just the day before Republic Day, there were so many events that were happening. I mean, the Soka was doing its own thing. The Rahul Sankrata and Hindi Manch, they were doing their own thing. The Hobbies Club was doing the whole thing. In fact, I had to run around, on Republic Day and the day before that, on my poor little 2 feet from one auditorium to the other. I mean, giving a pat on the back here and a pat on the back there. So it's a very vibrant group. I don't see them facing major adjustment problems for the two reasons that I've just mentioned to you.
Wonderful, sir. I think we've reached the end of our session, but it's been a great privilege to listen to the director LBSNA, and I've always admired the kind of passion that you have brought to this job, the sheer magnitude of change that you brought into the academy, and we were very keen to listen to you today and host you on our good governance webinar series. We've had a series of very senior officials speaking on this forum. We've had Mr. Ram Sevak Sharma coming. We've had constitutional experts speaking on it. We're deeply privileged that you could spare time today, and I'll request Professor Poonam to formally pose the vote of thanks. Before I close, I like the word conscious incrementalism, but I leave the copyright to you, but occasionally I will use it in some of your
You're most welcome to use it. You're most welcome to use it. In fact, I use this term. So thank you very much, Sri and Dr. Poonam Singh, for calling me here. I used this in my inaugural address for the Special Foundation course in Hyderabad. So it's recorded, and it is said that conscious incrementalism is a term. But thank you so much. You see, I must thank you, because what happens is that because you asked me to speak, I prepared, I did some homework, and therefore it sort of, helps to cogitate the mind to get the same things together. And this example, say for example, Lakshadweep and Murshidabad comes out. You realize that you cannot apply good practices without context. Thank you very much, Srini, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you so much
formal vote of thanks.
all those who listen. Okay. All right.
A formal vote of thanks, sir. I'll request Professor Poonam to give the vote of thanks. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a great day. We have heard you, and especially I would like to mention only 3 and 4, word, because I have heard during the Maldives inauguration and the Bangladesh, the training programs. So it was great. The honor that we have listened today, and all of us are very, very benefited. So just to mention in it 2 and 3 words, sir, you have mentioned that the bright individual might be the first, the decision-making core competency of the IAS officers. I think all the senior civil servants and the civil servants are here, and need to touch the ground, because this is, the learning, the aspect for any officers. So need to touch the ground, and the ground reality we must know. And the third thing, sir, you have told that what can be done, what must be done, and what must never be done. This is a very, I can say that it's a great, the thought which you have given by you today. And I would like to, very, very thanks to you, sir, very sincere thanks. And I would like to thank all the listeners, the district collectors, the officers from DRPG, the IM faculties, the eminent scholars, and all our colleagues. And so thank you so much, sir. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.